All right, so are you ready to dive into this whole Hush Lounge thing with me?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
It's a rough one. 4 gone and 17 injured in Birmingham.
Tragic. Just tragic.
And it's like, yeah, the headlines give you the grim facts, but, well, you know how we do things.
Always more beneath the surface, right?
Right. There's got to be more to this story. So we've been going through all these articles, and the thing is, the very first thing, Mayor Woodfin, Police Chief Sermon, they come out swinging, murder for hire, just like that.
That's pretty definitive, isn't it? Especially so early on.
Right, like automatic weapons, shell casings everywhere, over 100 they're saying, and then they drag out the victim's past almost like,
Like they're already building a case, not just announcing an investigation. I mean, determining a motive, especially in a case like this. That's complex. It takes time. And to just declare that before they've even, recovered the firearms?
yeah, it's like they're saying case closed before it's even really begun. But here's where it gets really strange, because then all of a sudden, Glock switches.
It's like that becomes the central talking point. Yeah.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And like for people who don't know, we got to lay this out. What are we even talking about with Glock switches?
Right. So in simple terms, we're talking about a device that can basically turn a semi-automatic handgun into a fully automatic weapon. Big difference. Huge legal implications. We're talking federal offense here.
Yeah. Massive. And I mean, they haven't even found the actual weapons yet, have they? So how are they so sure these Glock switches are involved? It just seems like they're, I don't know, forcing a connection.
You have to wonder, is there a reason this narrative is the one they're pushing? Because whether or not Glock switches were actually used in this instance, it's definitely a hot-button issue. Politicians, law enforcement, gun control advocates, everyone's talking about it. And this gives them a platform.
So it's like they're using this tragedy to, what, push an agenda. It feels kind of, I don't know.
Opportunistic, maybe?
Yeah. And look, I'm not saying something can't be true just because it's convenient, but it definitely makes you want to look twice.
Right. Absolutely. Scrutinize everything. Speaking of which, there's this detail that's been strangely absent from most of the coverage. You know who owns the Hush Lounge? Guy named Ryan Pryor, former Birmingham PD.
Hold on, seriously. The owner of the club is an ex-cop, and no one's really mentioning this.
It's odd, right? You'd think that'd be bigger news. Especially since the club itself has had its share of trouble. Prior incidents, run-ins with authorities over safety, even some reports of violence.
So not exactly a clean record, then.
Not exactly. And Pryor himself is keeping it low-key. Insists the shooting has nothing to do with the club or its operations.
Sure, sure. But you gotta wonder, with his background, the club's history, there's gotta be more to it, right?
It's worth considering, for sure.
Okay, you ready for another layer to this whole thing?
Hit me.
Because this is where things get really interesting. See, there's talk, more like whispers really, that this whole thing might tie back to a fight that went down earlier that same night. Apparently there was a Jackson-Olin High School reunion, and, well, a lot of folks from that reunion ended up at the Hush Lounge.
Okay, now rumors are just that, rumors.
Mm-hmm.
But even if there's something to that, it changes the entire picture, doesn't it?
Right. We go from a plan hit, murder for hire, like they keep saying, to what? Some kind of high school reunion brawl that escalated.
It makes you question that very neat, very convenient narrative, doesn't it? And if this reunion angle does have any weight to it, why is it not being talked about more?
Exactly. It's like, what are they trying to keep quiet? Who are they protecting even? Makes you feel like we're looking at the wrong clues here, you know? And speaking of wrong clues, have you heard about this proposed law in Alabama? The one that could change who's actually in charge of the police force in Birmingham.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. The one where the state could potentially step in and appoint police chiefs, taking that power from local officials. That's some interesting timing, wouldn't you say?
More than interesting, right. And we know Woodfin and Thurmond, they've been pretty vocal against that proposal. Now suddenly you've got this huge shooting, high profile, lots of eyes on Birmingham.
And they need to show they have a handle on the city's crime, that it's not spiraling out of control. This shooting, if it's seen as a symptom of something bigger in Birmingham, well, it plays right into the hands of those pushing for state intervention.
So it's all about controlling how it looks then. Make it a contained thing, an isolated incident, not a sign of a citywide problem. Murder for hire, that's manageable, solvable.
Right. It gives this impression of order, control. We handled it. No need for the state to get involved. Makes you think, right? Like this whole, I don't know, the balance of power, who's really in control with this tragedy as the backdrop.
And it all just points back to this feeling like we're missing something. We've only scratched the surface, these Glock switches, for example. I keep pushing that angle, but something about it feels off.
It's good to be skeptical, to question things. Because even if they find the weapons, proving a Glock switch was actually used, that's not always straightforward. I mean, you can modify a gun for automatic fire, but there are ways to disable that function, temporarily.
So even if the guns they eventually find haven't been modified, that doesn't necessarily mean a Glock switch wasn't involved at some point.
Exactly. It's about the impression they create, the narrative. And it feeds into this larger strategy, right? Look at us. We're dealing with these dangerous individuals, these illegal modifications. It's a lot easier than addressing the underlying issues that contribute to these tragedies in the first place.
Hey, but this high school reunion thing, I gotta be honest, I can't let that go. It's like this loose thread I can't help but tug on. What if, and stay with me here, what if they're right about the targeted attack part, but the target wasn't who they think it is, or at least not for the reasons they're assuming?
Go on.
What if it all goes back to something, someone from that reunion?
Okay, now that's an interesting thought. That shifts the focus away from the victim's past toward a whole new set of possibilities. Motives, relationships, histories, all kinds of things that might have led to that night.
And if those connections lead back to someone they want to protect, or some truth that just doesn't fit their narrative right now, well, that would explain why this reunion angle has been kind of swept under the rug, right?
Absolutely. Controlling the narrative is a lot easier when you get to decide which details get amplified and which ones get, well, minimized.
And it makes you realize it's not just the authorities doing that either, right? I mean, the media plays a huge role in all this.
Oh, absolutely. Whose stories are they choosing to tell? Whose voices are they amplifying? Are they digging deeper, asking the tough questions, or are they just echoing the official line? It's on them to be more than just a mouthpiece, wouldn't you say?
And that kind of makes you think even we're part of this whole information ecosystem. We've got our stack of articles, these rumors, and we're trying to piece it all together.
Yeah.
But who decides what goes in that stack, what gets left out? It's like even with the best intentions, we're still only getting a small part of the picture.
That's the thing, isn't it? We're all working with limited information. That's why it's so important to, I don't know, acknowledge our own biases, look for different perspectives, and never stop questioning what we're being told, especially when the stakes are this high.
And they are. We're talking about 4 lives lost, a community that's hurting, and this power struggle looming over it all. Like everyone's playing a game of chess, but no one wants to admit what the pieces actually represent.
And in this game, the truth. That's often the hardest piece to find.
It's true, those pieces on the board. They're not just pieces, they're people, families, a whole community trying to make sense of this awful thing. Easy to forget that sometimes.
It is. It really is. We get so caught up in the politics, the media circus. It's easy to lose sight of the human cost.
And that's kind of why we do this, right? To cut through the BS, get to the heart of it, even if it's tough, even if it raises more questions than answers, because those families deserve that, don't they? To have someone asking those questions.
Absolutely. We can't let things just stand as they are, especially when there are so many loose ends. Like this whole high school reunion angle, even if it leads nowhere, we at least have to look at it, right? Explore that possibility.
Right. What if this wasn't some calculated hit, but it all spun out from something else? Old grudges, bad blood, whatever went down that night at that reunion. It changes everything, and it makes you think, what else are we missing? What else didn't fit the story they wanted to tell? So they just ignored it.
It's classic confirmation bias.
Yeah.
You start with your conclusion, in this case, murder for hire,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just look for whatever supports that. Anything that doesn't fit gets tossed aside.
And that's where, I don't know, I keep coming back to the media. They can't just take dictation. They got to be the ones pushing back, holding people accountable, really digging for the truth.
100%. Journalism, real journalism, it's about giving a voice to those who don't have one, shining a light on the things people don't want you to see. It's not about just accepting what you're told.
It's like what we're trying to do here, right? We're not investigators, we're not reporters. But we can at least try to think critically, look at the info, point out when something's not adding up, and ask those questions.
And hopefully get our listeners to do the same. Don't just accept things at face value. Question everything. Demand more.
Because the truth matters, right? For those families, for Birmingham, for all of us. If something good can come from this, if we can learn from it, prevent something like this from happening again, then this whole thing, all the digging, it'll have been worth it.
Sometimes just asking the right questions is how you start finding the answers.
So to everyone out there listening, keep asking those questions, keep digging, and never underestimate the power of a good deep dive. Until next time.